Hello, everyone. I want to introduce you all to Vinod Khosla, who obviously needs no introduction. But just to recap, Vinod is the founder of Khosla Ventures, which has 20 plus early venture investments worth 10 billion or more now. He's had a long history of focusing on health, AI, robotics, sustainability, consumer, and more. And for the young people in the room, he's also the founder of Sun Microsystems, which revolutionized workstations, servers, processors. In fact, you might have used Java or OpenOffice. Those are also revolutionary Sun Microsystems products. Earlier today, you heard from Eric Schmidt. Eric was, I think, a first 15 employee at Sun. You can correct me on that, Vinod. But certainly, Vinod knows how to find the winners. So, Vinod, um, thank you again for coming. I thought we could just start at the highest level to get us kicked off, which is what has you most excited about this wave of AI innovation?
Well, what's exciting is I think we're at the knee of the curve. If you look at any exponential, it looks inconsequential. The internet started in the 70s and it looked pretty inconsequential till about 1996. And I still remember a little room I went to on a Saturday morning to visit Mark Andreessen and Jim Clark. And there were three people in the company called Netscape. And we saw that platform take off after Netscape came to the fore. We saw something similar happen with the iPhone in 2007. And you mentioned Sun Microsystems. Sun Microsystems and the PC started off the microprocessor around 1980, 1982, that time frame. What could you use a microprocessor for? The reason I bring this up is these are platforms. And they enable a lot to be built on top of those platforms. And AI is probably the single most powerful platform we've seen in all this history, at least the 40 some years I've been dealing with technology innovation, and will enable many more things to be done than has been done before. And that's the opportunity for everybody in this room. It's much more explosive, and I suspect the next 5 years will see a Cambrian explosion of possibilities that will surprise everybody. It's probably a good time to talk about something as we're talking about exponential. You know, most people who've tried GPT-2 and then GPT-3 sort of see the change. And ChatGPT is GPT 3.5 and 4 will be whenever it comes. Once you connect these and say, where will GPT 5 and 6 land on the capability curve, it becomes super exciting.
That sounds exactly right, but I'm curious about AI as a platform. I think of it as being fundamentally different in a couple of ways. One is that it's higher marginal cost than previous software products. And another is that it's a little bit less predictable. You don't always get out exactly what you expect. And so does that change how you think about the AI revolution versus previous technical revolutions?
No, I don't. Any system that's new, when cars first came out, they didn't have seatbelts. And they didn't even have a starter. You'd have to put this rod in the front and crank the engine. Cranking the engine came from actually physically turning the pistons. Having done it before, in my life, you sort of understand the capability is not all there day one. And one of the great things about ChatGPT and all the Bing stories and the Bard stories, people are unfairly penalizing Google or Microsoft for these stories. It is the discovery of the holes, the ways the system can be hacked. And to me, it's a huge positive because we are discovering problems we need to solve. these problems are temporary, and once they identify, which is the biggest part of solving them, they will all be solved. So, GPT-4 will hallucinate a lot less than GPT-3. GPT-5, less so. We can come back to, is this a one-way train or other things come in? For example, and let's come back to that if we have time. But I do think these are all temporary. They're great press fodder. I mean, the press people have to make a living when ChatGPT is writing their articles.
I'm gonna wait for a second while Vinod rejoins us.
Too.
Oh,
And so I shouldn't be like, there's pros and cons to any new technology, whether it's nuclear, whether it's biotechnology. The more powerful the technology, the more it can be used in bad ways too. And so we should be cautious. So I don't want to be a blind optimist. I think we should be cautious, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't get the benefits from these technologies. And these so-called flaws in the system will slowly be solved or removed or eliminated.
yeah. I think that's interesting. I was going to ask a question about, whether the sort of beyond the reasonable or ambitious founders, as you've described them, need to be differently cautious. But it sounds like you're saying, no, it's the same level of caution that innovation is always required.
Well, no, I think because the technology is going to be more powerful, we'll need more caution. In fact, it seems like the Wuhan virus was a lab leak now. Nobody knows for sure, so we should give it the benefit of the doubt. It can cause a lot of damage. I could see it being harnessed for really bad things. One example I cite: when we got nuclear technology, you knew when somebody was using it. There was what's in nuclear disarmament talks called verifiability. That is not going to be true of AI. Makes it hugely more dangerous when it's deployed by the bad guys.
Fascinating. I think that it brings me to thoughts of sort of government safeguard and alignment measures. As an investor, do you think that there's businesses that can be made in this space, or is that necessarily going to be a government and policy pursuit?
Um, I do think businesses can be made in this space. I do personally believe in the end we will need a lot more regulation. But premature regulation will slow down the technology. I'll give you an example. I was talking to somebody in China, actually Kai-Fu Lee, who's written a very big book. And his comment to me was, if there's a self-driving car that kills somebody in the US, it'll set back the field by years. If that happens in China, they will overlook it because they want faster development of the technology. I don't think either point is the right level of safeguard, and we will have to figure it out. I mean, I don't think anybody can preordain this is the right set of regulation. We will discover the flaws and respond to it relatively quickly. So we need more dynamism in how we address these issues. But I think we should spend more time talking about the opportunities and upsides here, keeping in mind there's downsides too.
That makes sense to me. I'm going to have a couple more questions about the macro environment, but we'll circle back to them. I'm curious, you spend so much time in biotech, sustainability, robotics. Are there effects of AI in those areas that you think the audience might be overlooking at this point?
Well, I don't think there's an area of GDP that won't be affected. So wherever your interests, there will be lots of opportunity. in bio, drug design can be done and really enhanced with AI. Deep fold or protein folding is a solved problem or near solved problem. It's not fully solved, is a good example. Can we custom design peptides to do a particular task? Absolutely. On the other end, we saw a paper saying how fusion reactors can be controlled by AI systems. That's a hard, complex problem, control problem. And I think AI solutions will add a lot to it. At the other end, there's a lot of data in prospecting and mining. We are short of resources if the world is going to live a rich life. Could you find lithium or copper or other mines with AI-based algorithms? Absolutely. But we've also done Splash, which is the most popular music game on Roblox. It's a complete AI product. It was started 5 years ago, long before generative AI, with the idea that content will mostly be generated by AI. Their goal when they started was to do a top 10 music hit done completely by AI, no humans involved. And they'll stick with that goal, but right now it's a popular game to make every 13-year-old girl or boy sound like a rock star on Roblox. It's called Splash. State Space is using it to generate scenarios for gaming. So if you're training to be a great gamer, State Space will use AI to generate scenarios. So almost any area from self-driving to mining to financial analysts, chip design is another very, very promising area. Chips are way too complex to be done by humans. I think AI will do much better. AI in education, my son's working on a primary care doctor with AI. My wife has a nonprofit that's building an AI tutor for kids. Anybody want to work on that? Call me. So lots and lots of promising areas, hardly an area that is not open to innovation with AI.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about your interest versus some of the topics we just discussed is that the software is advancing so quickly. You're very interested in many aspects of the physical world, and you touched on that, but it's often to create or to monitor the physical world. So to create chips or to monitor fusion reactors. And I'm curious, do you think that this is going to move us humans, the world, more into a sort of digital first world? Or do you think that we're going to begin to have the ability to have impacts in the physical world that are a little bit larger, and we should expect to see sort of more physical tech be developed in the next few years?
Well, it's not just physical, content creation. Most content creations being hugely impacted. Music creation being hugely impacted. The whole advertising industry will not have just a few ads they run over and over again. It could be really innovative. So both physical and virtual worlds or electronic world, digital worlds will be impacted. And so I'd say to your audience, no matter where their interest lies, there is an opportunity. Could you do better protein design for foods? So I do think the opportunity is sort of beyond what most of us can imagine today. And so pursue wherever your passion is within the field of AI. I have this thing like pursue your passion is really bad advice unless it's pursue your passion in an area where you can make a living.
Prescient advice. I think a lot of you in the room are attempting to do that by being here today. But I also want to talk about the workforce. Even at MIT, people are talking about how AI can replace not necessarily the jobs, but many of the specific actions that people perform at work. And so, how do you think this will transform the workforce? Who do you think stands to gain or lose? And for upcoming graduates, how should they factor this into their career decisions?
So I think you have to look at time frames. If I were to look at 2040, sort of 15, 20 years from now, I believe 80% of all jobs will be done by an AI better than a human. That's a excuse me, I have a cold. That's a very large disruption in the economy and the capitalist system. Excuse me. We will. I apologize. We will need social policy. And 7 years ago, I wrote a blog called AI Will Cause Great Abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth, all the metrics by which we look at how well an economy is doing, and cause increasing income disparity. And I was very concerned about that. This was about 2014. I published it in Forbes. So one has to worry about that. And depending upon the career you pick, you want to surf ahead of this wave. It will cause disparity in income. And individually, you can look at which side of that wave you want to be on. Obviously, I'd say on the right side. But there will be huge social policy implications, backlash against the technology, pushback against some of its implications, and pushback against some of its bad uses. I think I wrote a blog about 5 or 6 years ago on, Elon Musk and others have talked about sentient AI. I wrote a blog called AI Scary for the Right Reason. Cyber warfare, cyber crime, those are really scary areas. So depending upon your passion, you make a career in any of those. It's only limited by your imagination.
So you said earlier in the conversation, we can talk about this one-way train we might be getting on. Is this a little bit of what you're thinking about, that this revolution in some ways may actually be bigger than earlier ones and will be, the train is leaving the station with AI?
I think the revolution will be much larger than the transformation, say, mobile phones caused or the internet caused. But it will build on top of those. And those will be tools in the expansion of the applications of AI. So that's a great example. Could primary care be replaced by AI? Absolutely will be. My son's working on that. We have a company working on basically psychiatry. Can it be replaced by AI? This is a company in the UK. Absolutely. So things you might not imagine are possible.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, the way you describe that, it sounds sort of predestined. A one-way train, though, is an intimidating thing to consider. Are you looking forward to it? Is it something that you think will, you've said is great abundance? Just sort of curious to get a little bit more into your mindset on how you look at this development.
I'm very much a huge optimist who realizes that we will have to be very dynamic in responding to its negative consequences, which we will have. And I think that's the way to look at it. And we shouldn't, policy could slow it down. It could be used for good and bad purposes. So I just think we have to be a right mix of optimistic and paranoid.
It was interesting talking to Eric this morning. During his conversation, we talked about that in the age of AI, a book he co-wrote with Kissinger and professor from MIT. He mentions that the field of AI sort of needs its own Descartes or Kant. And so it needs sort of a new wave of thinking to begin to guide how we use it. Is that the sort of idea that you look for too, so that we can take advantage of its the optimism and abundance it brings while still guiding us safely?
I do think we will have to look at it very fundamentally. And I think the phrase I've seen Eric use, we were in the same conference giving talks on Tuesday in DC. It said the relationship between technology and humanity will have to be re-examined. And I think as vague as that term is, it needs to be vague because we don't know in what the dimensionality of that examination needs to be.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking us sort of on this far away journey. I do want to bring us back in because I know you've got a lot of thoughts about sort of the nearer term, but I'm going to stay at a high level to talk about macro. Everyone's so excited about these use cases in the space, but I feel like there's really dynamic sort of chip scarcity, geopolitical issues, energy considerations. How is that factoring into your mental model?
Well, the identified problems in AI, energy is an example, are to me solvable. Let's take a simple example: power consumption and what it might take as percentage of global power production. You can make the extrapolations, but then there's non-linearities. If you went from digital to analog computing, for example, 100x improvement in teraops per watt is possible. In fact, we have a company, Analog Inference, that's actually building analog inferencing chips for AI, and literally 100-fold improvement in power. So linear extrapolation of the past is not the way to predict the future. It's invent the future you want. And I think mostly it can be done. It's much more possible than people believe. Analog computing is an example. If we could, for example, make fusion much more tenable, then power disappears as an issue in power production in a clean way. And in fact, we are investors in Commonwealth Fusion that we spun out of MIT's Plasma Fusion Lab. That was really exciting to me. In fact, fusion and AGI may be the two most important things to work on.
Well, luckily we have a lot of people sort of around campus focusing on those two areas. To get a little bit more narrow and maybe talk about some near-term investments that you're making, I want to think about AI products versus AI businesses. So on the panel this morning, we had a startup founder, we had someone who's integrating LLMs into Microsoft Office, and a few others who are sort of working on this near-term integration. And there's a question of how do you identify something that will be an AI feature that should be integrated into an existing product or business with great distribution and existing users versus a startup that's genuinely disruptive and changes how humans interact with software or the world and creates long-term value for their investors. How are you thinking about that?
So here's what I would say to your audience. Think of the idea of building a valuable business as climbing Mount Everest in the following very, very precise way. You don't get to Mount Everest without getting to base camp, and then Camp 1 and Camp 2, Camp 3, Camp 4, I think, and then the final ascent. Now, that analogy is more apt because that's not a straight line. You have to plan the future, the route you're going to take before you start. there's many more peaks higher than base camp you can get to easily, but that don't lead to Mount Everest. So you have to think through what is your MVP, what's MVP, what's the next set of stepping stones you need to get to, or base camps or camps, on the way to having increasing advantage as opposed to decreasing advantage over time. If it's just providing input for a spreadsheet, for example, I'll do natural language input to a spreadsheet, and there's quite a few examples of startups doing that. You have to ask, does it let me collect assets that make my next camp a bigger barrier to entry than the previous one? Because anybody can do the first part. But am I doing it in a way that leads to camp 2, camp 3, so on, with increasing advantage over people who come behind me? And that's the kind of thing we spend an incredible amount of time thinking through with founders. Like, which strategy makes sense and which one will get genericized and everybody will have it. So what's this path where as you go along the path, your probability of reaching Mount Everest increases. Your lead over the people coming behind you increases, or you collect assets like data or other things that, and it doesn't become like the person coming behind you knows what you're doing and can copy it easily. It's a tricky task, and I think that's what a good investor can help an entrepreneur with.
I feel like this, you give great advice on how to build truly huge businesses. And as sort of a closing thought,
I like to say there's a massive difference between a $0 million business and a $0 billion business. It's the same revenue, but the $0 billion business founder is thinking about the business in 5 years quite differently than the $0 million founder. And I run into plenty of both. And our job is to help them go build a $0 billion business and map out how this accumulating advantage makes it unapproachable, or competition can't catch up.
Yeah. Well, Vinod, I know that you're going to have to go in a minute. I just wanted to give you an opportunity, if you want to say anything to the students in the room and the entrepreneurs in the room before you leave, we'd love to hear it. And otherwise, we so appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us at the first MIT GenAI Summit.
So what I would say to your audience, the opportunity is huge. It's never been greater. And the next 5, 10, and 15 years will be very, very exciting. But each 5-year period will be exciting in a different way, with a different set of criteria to build businesses as the ecosystem develops. When you do things from scratch, when you leverage the ecosystem, how do you build accumulating advantage? So it is a great place to be, and obviously your audience recognizes it because they're here. The teams you build, I like to say, the team you build is the company you build, not the business plan you make. And so we also spend an enormous amount of time helping people decide which is the right orthogonal mix of talent that helps you build a business. People just tend to found businesses with people around them, friends, and that's a good reason. But you really need to minimize the risks of the business over the long term. And so building the right teams and having investors who take the long view. We were the first investors in OpenAI. 5 years ago, it wasn't clear where it was going. But we took the very long view of where it could go. And that's very, very important. And it's not obvious. So patient investors who help you think through how things might evolve, when to make a firm plan, when to make a plan to make a plan. That's also incredibly important. There's a lot of resources on our website I'd refer people to under a section called Entrepreneurial Resources, mostly meant to help entrepreneurs. But these are nuanced areas, and I feel having screwed up more often than almost anybody I know over the 40 years I've been doing innovation. I have a few tricks I can help entrepreneurs with, so happy to talk to any of them and help them out, whether we invest or not. And I would say whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit. You know, my wife's doing AI tutors as a non-profit for K through 12 students. And I really don't care which way we go because it's impact that matters.
Well, that's fantastic advice, and we thank you for showing up even with
And let me give my email. It's vk@Khosla Ventures. If somebody wants to reach me, I'm very available.
I think everyone just wrote that down in the room. Well, Vinod, we cannot thank you enough. We look forward to having you back and expect a gift in the mail in a few days. Thanks so much.
Great. It's always great to talk to entrepreneurs. So always happy to talk to potential entrepreneurs or young minds looking to explore where they want to go. Thank you.